hello to those who are all just starting to come into the call. Coming very quickly, that's fantastic. Hello Fancy Nurse, hello Marin Carlo, hello Edmund. My name's Kate. Just waiting for my guest to join me. Let me just see if we... Yep. So to those who are just joining us, we're just waiting to connect. Hi Annelise.
Hi Kate.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Fine. Lovely to see you.
You too.
We're just waiting for our superstar to join us, Mike. And already we've got 52 people who are already in and waiting, which is fantastic. Coming in very quickly. Often at this point I'll go, hello Gary, hello Dato, but actually they're coming in too fast for me to keep up with. So got just one more minute and then I'm sure our other special guest will be joining us, because Annelise is very special as well.
Mike's the special guest though.
What I'm liking is that you have a blue backdrop, mine's red, so we're sort of colour coordinating. Oh,
yeah, we're getting the primaries. Mike has yellow.
I think Mike is just coming in now, absolutely on the dot.
Hey everyone.
Hello.
Hi Mike.
Hi Mike, how are you?
Doing well.
And can you hear us all right?
Yep.
Both Annelise, sound okay? Is the sound good for you, Mike?
Yep, sounds good for me.
Fantastic. And can I get some thumbs up from some of the lovely people who have already joined us on the call, or Sandra or Eleanor or somebody, to let us know that you can all hear me and Mike and Annelise okay, the other end. So can I get some thumbs up from the other end from somebody? Okay. Nobody's willing to do that. Anybody? Yay!
There we go.
Thank you. Brilliant. Okay, so absolutely on the dot. Lovely to see you, Mike. And thank you to everyone who's joining us. I was just saying, Mike, normally I normally come in a minute or two just before people start to come in. And as they're coming in, I'm able to keep up with the pace of people coming in, but they're coming in so fast for you that I can't. So, and I don't know if, can you see? Because you're streaming live, you can see all the hearts already.
Yeah, it seems like continuous hearts that I'm seeing.
I expect they're for you. Or maybe they're for Annelise, they're not for me. Anyway, here we are. So we've got two special guests with us today. So if we do some quick introductions, my name's Kate and I am the director of The Big Draw. And we'll talk a bit more about mark making and visual literacy and visual communication. And I think you'll probably start to already see the strong alignment that we have with the work that both Mike and Annelise are involved in. So we'll be talking a lot about visual communication, visual thinking today. But I'm sure everybody already knows who you both are, but if we could have a quick introduction. So Mike, in terms of introducing you, I have got down designer, author, teacher, illustrator, polymath extraordinaire. So if you want to do a quick introduction for yourself.
Yeah, primarily I'm a designer, been trained as a designer. So I've done many different types of design, all the way from dinosaur-driven print design with metal and pens and T-squares and stuff like that, all the way to modern digital design, and now focus on software design, interface and user experience. And then along the way, have been really fascinated by this whole visualization. For me, because I'm old school, it was just part of the way I learned how to do design. And so I was really fortunate that I learned those old school ways and applied them and used them, even as the transition into digital happened. So they just sort of always stuck with me. And then when the time came to solve a problem with my own note-taking, I used that same approach to solve that problem. And that led to writing the books and running communities and speaking here with you today, teaching people how to do this approach, which I think I found, the thing that's been true for me is, if it's helping me, it's probably going to help somebody else. So I should probably share it. And that's always been true, whether it's figuring out sketchnoting or even some of the things learned in that space, that there's lots of people that would love to learn how to do it, but they just don't know. And so I find myself in a position to share what I've learned, and maybe it will help someone.
I'm sure you're right, and I think probably the reason that, and I know you've had huge success, and obviously you're doing very well from a business point of view, which is wonderful. But actually, I know that it didn't come about from that. It came about from trying to find originally some very practical solutions to some challenges that you had at a conference, and you've got some good stories there, which I'm sure we'll get to in due course. But we can start to pick up on some of that old school stuff. And I think certainly from a big draw point of view, when we're talking about visual communication, mark making, visual thinking, it's global, isn't it? The reason that these things are popular and so powerful is that they are tapping into things that cuts across different cultures, different beliefs, different ideologies. It doesn't matter. All that doesn't matter. If you can use some of these tools, they can be very powerful. And then I think even potentially they could change your life. So we're going to be spreading out some of those ideas. But Annelise, I haven't forgotten about you. Would you be able to do an introduction as well?
Sure, yeah. My name's Annelise. I'm usually the one you're talking to when you're talking to the social media of Concepts app. I'm a trained graphic designer and illustrator, and I do some painting. I'm excited to hear all about sketchnoting from Mike today and learn.
And you're very creative as well, Annelise. Because you make it sound like you're just tech support. You're a lot more than that.
Yeah, in my spare time, I do some painting and illustration as well.
Yeah, so I know you do watercolors and oils. We'll start. I'm sure we'll bring some of that out in due course. And just to say about, because Annelise has sort of put her neck on the line a bit and said that often if people were to get through to Concepts, it might be Annelise who would help you. Just to say, please save any specific technical concepts queries that you might have. Be really grateful if you could maybe save that for another call. This isn't the space for that. This is for us to share ideas and thoughts and to sort of explore and be creative. So no tech questions, please, in the chat, because I will ignore them. So,
yes, if you do have any concepts related questions, feel free to message us anytime. We're always happy to chat and talk support and help.
Yeah. And just to start to thread together, because some of you coming might be thinking, why are these people talking? Why are we doing this? Well, lots of reasons. The big draw, if we don't know what we do, we are a very small charity actually, but we have a very big reach. So we run lots of different programs. We run a global festival. We actually have a national contemporary arts and crafts prize. We do lots of advocacy around the value and the role of creativity in thinking and in making and exploring and being playful and coming up with new ideas, experimentation. And we talk a lot about mark making with meaning. We talk a lot about drawing, sketch making, and visual literacy and visual thinking. And when we're talking about that, yes, sometimes we are talking about very pretty, beautiful, aesthetic pictures sometimes. A lot of the time we're not. A lot of the time we're just we're talking about those powerful marks with meaning that could be actually in any sector, cross-sector, interdisciplinary. It could be a scientist, architect, 3D animator, engineer, architects, blah, blah, all who are using these types of visual mark making with meaning tools, sketching, drawing, however you want to spin it, to communicate their ideas, make sense of the world around us, and often play around with, explore, communicate often quite tricky concepts. And again, these are some of the things that we'll be threading out with, these are all key things that I know that Mike brings out in, not only in the books, his podcast, but throughout your career development, Mike. So you can see why we're aligned from a big draw point of view. We do a lot of content online. We do these drawn-in conversations with people that we think are interesting and cool about twice a month, and we love Mike and Annelise, so that's why we're here for that. And what we do is we obviously stream them live. We keep them on our Instagram account at the Big Draw. We save them, we put them onto other things afterwards, so they'll go onto YouTube. We'll share them on Twitter and all of things as a result, because we want to spread the word about the power of visual thinking and visual literacy. So that's really the links. And the reason that we have our special guest with us today is that the Big Draw are very, very happy. It's a very collaborative, creative partnership. We have an ongoing partnership with the fantastic team at Concepts, collaborators, co-creators, and kind sponsors. So there's the link there. and we're beginning to co-curate some sort of the beginning of a program between us. And this was really how we got to meet you, Mike, wasn't it? So there's some of the context there. So you can see, for the people joining us, there's a lot of threads all swirling in together, all, I think, coalescing, I would say, around visual literacy, communicating ideas, mark making with meaning. And so if I can come back to you, Mike. So let's be a bit provocative. Why is this useful? Why is it? I mean, I know why it's useful. I mean, I think it's, you know, it increases confidence. I think mixing up those tools that combine aspects of imagery and line and handwriting and maybe some hand lettering and maybe some symbols that mean something to you. It's a way of, it's almost a shorthand of capturing your ideas, often very quickly, in a way that you can come back to and are almost like well, for me, I'm a very visual thing, almost like a photograph or a snapshot of what you remembered at the time. But if I bring you in here, because I know that you have a great story actually about how you got started all of this with that conference and that notebook. So over to you, Mike.
Sure. So why it's a really good question. Why would you bother doing this? Because it's something in addition to what maybe you're doing now. I would argue that the big benefits to start off with are, number one, it keeps you engaged in the process of whatever you're doing. If you're trying to solve a problem at work, and you know, if you're just typing out notes or you're chatting with someone, that sort of exists on one plane. When you take out a piece of paper or you take an iPad and a pencil or an Android tablet or a Wacom tablet, whatever, and you start to draw, it brings into another plane what you're working with. So you're not only thinking with words and concepts, but you're now expressing them on a substrate of some kind, paper or screen, whatever. And it lets you get those ideas out and see how they look in context to each other and start to look at, like you talked in the beginning, all the threads crossing over. You start to see the threads happening on the page as you're working through these ideas, and you become engaged in that sense making, right? That is sense making, the thing that you're doing. I would say the second reason why is when you do that, I think it activates areas of your brain, more areas of your brain, so that when you come back to those notes, or even when you reflect on those notes, there's more in your memory that's connected together because you're doing something physical, you're using your brain and thinking, you're using your eyes, and many of your senses are being used to visualize those ideas on the page or on the screen. And then I think then finally it helps your memory. So you retain those ideas because of all those things. You're engaged. It uses your whole body. And then when you go back to look at those again, it helps you remember. I know I can tell you that when I've done sketch notes of travel in a restaurant, even just, I mean, black and white, no color, not fancy, not beautiful drawings, just my expression in that moment. I can look at that image, and for me, it brings me back in full color to that little restaurant on the Upper West Side of New York City having Thai food, right? Like with my wife, and it's dark, and outside it was cold, and like I can keep on going with detail because by capturing that information, it's sort of put little markers all over my memory and my mind that I can then pull back together into a coherent memory. So I think there's a lot of those things that are a benefit that you don't always immediately think of until after you've done it. So that's the challenge, is to try it, and then you start to see the benefits.
I think that's right. And I want to just pick up on a couple of some of the things that you took. I mean, I love that phrase, sense making. And I wanted to, when we were met, I mean, we've met a few times, obviously over Zoom, Mike and I, and Annelise. And I wrote down one of the things, and there was one thing that you said, a little quote, which I hope you don't mind, but I jotted down. And it was, we were all talking about being visual thinkers, and I think all three of us are very visual. I'm terrible. I'm a constant doodle. Anybody who knows me in meetings knows that I am constantly scribbling, doodling, squirrels. I might draw a little squiggly face of the person talking. You know, it's just a massive. And I, just like you, Mike, will come back. Those are my notes. Those are my bullet points, actually. So I will come back to that. So when I have to go back and remind myself of what we discussed at some particular meeting and do a quick summary for whoever, If I'm dealing with very creative people, I might just take a photo of my scribbles because they will remember. But they have to, importantly, they would have had to have been physically with me if they're shared. That's very powerful. That as a tool, that collective sketch note taking or visual art making. If they're just for me, I find that incredibly powerful. For me, it's almost like a photograph, and just like you going back to your Thai meal, I will remember the conversation. I remember where I was, what we discussed, and and it literally, it could be. It's probably something like this. I'll look and I'll think, oh yeah, that squiggle means that we're going to go into partnership. We agreed that out. We phase it like this, X, Y, and it just does. It just does for me, and I think it's incredibly powerful. But one of the things that you also said. So what you said was, this is not just documenting my thinking, it is my thinking.
Yeah, so that's a Richard Feynman quote, I think, where he talks to someone who was yours. I stole that from Richard Feynman, who, well, he's not with us now, but he was talking with someone, and the person was commenting on all the volumes of notebooks that he had on his shelf and saying how, it's so wonderful that you documented your thinking. It's like, no, that is my thinking. Those notebooks with the writing, that is it. Yeah. There's
no thing in the middle. That is it. That isn't what I use. But the other thing I wanted to pick on, which I think is very interesting, is there's something in there. You were talking about what I would call that haptic, that physicality, that hand-to-eye motion that you have between the hand and the pencil, or the Apple pencil, or the crayon, or whatever it is, the biro that you're using. But that motion, that physicality, that muscle memory movement is also incredibly powerful, and it's part of that whole process around how we see and what we choose to capture. And the old we all talk about it, everybody, we look at a glass of water, 10 people will draw something different from the glass of water. Somebody might focus on the shimmer that you see, somebody might just focus on the rim, or whatever it might be. People literally, they actually see different things in different ways, and what you choose to capture and which bits you choose to process and how you remember. So it'd be good to talk a bit more about that haptic side of things as well, that physicality, and just how important you think that is.
I think that's a big part of it. I think in the book, when I was explaining why I felt sketchnoting had a benefit, and at the time it was pretty much analog, because even though the iPad was, I think it had just been announced either just briefly after or during that period, it was not really a tool that could be seriously used for like visualization as it can now. Right now we have an Apple Pencil with detail, and there's other tablets that do similar things with that fine grained quality. Back then it was your finger or some kind of a stubby stylus, right? So at that time it was more the analog, the paper, the reaction of the paper against the pen or pencil, and sort of putting the marks on the page and sort of getting it out there. And I think there's something spatial as well. So like you talked about, this squiggly line means this and this, right? It means something to you. I have a funny thing when I'm in the car, if I need to remember something, I'll put something in an unusual place, and that will be the bookmark for me to, oh, that's right, I need to get gas before I go home, right? Like something's up on the dashboard in the wrong place. That's my signal to myself to fuel up the vehicle. And I think in the same way, when I realize when I do pages or screens of information, I lay it out, the positioning also has value that you may not automatically realize, like where I'm placing, like proximity of things together, or the connections if I make a line between them. And so I think that that's a pretty valuable addition. It's like meta information, right? You have the information and then you have the meta information. That's a little bit what we talked about when I was the drawing of the Thai dinner. If I show it to Annelise, she might say, oh, that's a really nice drawing, but it's all black and white and it doesn't make sense to me. For me and my wife, we were in that experience, and it means something more because we were there and I created it. So it's got a little different meaning. So the farther away you get from yourself, some of that meta information is lost. So in a lot of ways, I always believe like sketchnoting particularly is sort of for you first and for others second. It's nice if you can make it beautiful and share it with someone. I think more importantly, it needs to make sense for you, because you're capturing your thinking, you're sorting things out, and it needs to make sense for your reference so that you can make it a part of you. And if it happens to be beautiful or logical or makes sense for someone else, that's sort of the cherry on top of it.
Yeah. So again, I'm probably this is a bit deliberately provocative. And so if somebody was to say, well, that's not really drawing, right? Is it? Is that drawing? What's the difference? What's the difference between? So when, I mean, what we find at the Big Draw is we have a enormous ongoing challenge, and I don't think we'll ever get there with it, because it's the flip side of the power of even the word. It's almost like we're getting into semiotics of the word, the pencil, or the word drawing. So if I say to somebody, says, "Oh, what do you do?" and I say, "I work for a charity," and it's all about championing the power of drawing. And because I think if I start saying things like visual literacy, then I'm probably going to go down a rabbit hole, and might not necessarily. If I'm trying to keep it accessible, I might say drawing, and they'll go, "Oh, that's lovely." So, and immediately then they start to talk, and they're thinking this is about pretty pictures done with like nice colouring pencils, probably in charcoal or something, and that's great. That's great, and we do that sometimes. We have plenty of workshops and artists that we work with on that. It's brilliant. It's a very accessible approach of getting into drawing. But certainly at the Big Draw, drawing, which is why I often say mark making with meaning, is just so much more, isn't it? And it's going back to that idea that the pencil, putting it, something that is aesthetically pretty or beautiful doesn't just come, well, for a start, it doesn't just come from the art sector or artists. It can come from scientists, engineers, makers, 3D animators, modeling, blah, blah, whatever. It's coming from across those different sectors. That creativity is not confined to the silo of one sector. So it's looking at it in a much more of a polymathic, interdisciplinary way. But it's constantly coming back to this idea, trying to push back on this, the squiggles, they can be just for you. They can be just for you, and that's fine. Nobody else has to see it, and they're for you. It's part of your process of development and thinking and working through ideas. And it's bringing us back to that idea of being allowed to experiment, being allowed to play, being able to move things around. That sense of things don't have to be linear and then start here and end up in a very linear way. How boring. Let's move things around a bit. And so it's that creativity, that playfulness, that experimentation that I think this way of thinking about things embraces. Certainly your whole approach and your books and what you're doing with both Sketchnotes Army and your approach generally with Sketchnotes is aligned to. But also just to bring you back in, Annelise, and I think also it is something that concepts. It's you were talking about the journey from analog, like through the years, and gradually the different things come in. We've probably, many of us use or have Procreate. It's a great app. It's very painterly in many ways. You talked about the Wacom tablet. There's lots of different things that the SketchUp people can use. My kids have got things that they use as well. And there's so many different opportunities now that we have, which is fantastic. But I think one thing, because we do also have Annelise with us today. I think going back to the Concepts app, there is a flexibility there, in as much as you can get away with a bit more mistakes, I feel. So it's like, because of the infinite canvas, and you can, I think I'll just move away from that. You're not left with it. So it's almost trying to break free from the confines of, oh my goodness, we've made a mistake. And I think what we find at the Big Draw is, and it comes especially from grown-ups, is people are so frightened of putting anything down on a piece of paper or an iPad or whatever it might be, because they are so frightened that it is not going to be good. They're going to make a mistake. They're going to be ridiculed. Somebody's going to go, oh, that's a bit rubbish. That the fear stops them from doing that. So I think some of these tools are incredibly valuable, aren't they? Because they give people new ways to mitigate against that. Annelise, do you want to say anything about that? Because
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind me saying, but I know from having worked with you at the Big Draw, you're an incredible designer, and you're a perfectionist. You don't like that.
I am a perfectionist. I am. Yeah. That's why I personally, I used to use Procreate before I knew about Concepts. And as soon as I found Concepts, I can't use Procreate because I can't nudge my lines around. Whereas in Concepts, the nudge tool is my best friend. I can take anything I've drawn and push it into the right place.
Yeah.
And the infinite canvas is great as well for just iterating. So if you don't like something that you just made, you don't have to erase it, which I really appreciate the non-destructive nature of that, where I can just move over and start again and then come back to ideas that maybe I didn't notice were good at the time, but hold some type of value.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that phrase before until we were talking the other day. That what's it called? Non-destructive.
Non-destructive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the difference between vector and raster, which is a whole other conversation that we
Yeah.
don't need to get into, but yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's coming into that idea of trying to push back against things having to be pretty, aesthetic, for a public gaze, for an external gaze, and moving as much back into the process. But to the original provocation, Mike, what would you say if somebody said to you, well, Mike, this isn't drawing. This is just sort of squiggling and making marks. What's this about? How is this different to graphic recording?
Mm-hmm. Good question. I would probably turn it back on them and say, well, what do you think drawing is? I would love to hear what is your view of drawing, right? So, because I need to understand where they're coming from in their context, like so I'll tell it this way, a lot of what I developed in the book was sort of a reaction to what I was experiencing trying to teach sketchnoting. And that was when, especially adults, kids are not so susceptible to this. When you go to a group of adults and say, we're going to learn to do some drawing today, there are adults that freak out like they're going to have to go and speak in front of a crowd of 5,000. Like it is a fear, a real fear.
As well. And it's genuine, isn't it? Absolute, palpable.
Yes.
But they're about to vomit. It's just like, oh my God, don't make me do this. Yeah.
And so I think that's driven by a couple of things. One, in my observations, kids, when they reach around middle school, I guess you might say, age, there's sort of something that happens somewhere in there, middle school, high school, teenagers, right? Where either you really draw good and it becomes your identity, or you are not a good drawer and you give it up. Like it's like almost like a black and white slice, right? And there's a minority that draw really well and they keep on going. I was really fortunate that I somehow stayed in that group, but that there's a large group of people that feel like drawing is not part of my life anymore. I've given it up. It's not cool, or I'm not as good as that person, and all those things. And so there's that baggage. And when I encounter adults, many of the times I've taught this, the thing they're afraid of is like, number one, I can't draw like Michelangelo or someone famous. I don't have those drafting skills, right? So that's fear number one. Fear number two is if I draw with the level of skill that I have, you're going to laugh at me. Maybe I'm a CEO of a company and I draw like I'm 12 years old, right? That's really embarrassing, right? And I might reveal something about myself that I don't intend to because it's a rough thing that I'm not used to, right? So those are all three things. And that's a lot of the reason that I reacted in my book with the statement that you see all over the place that I use, ideas, not art. It's not that art is bad. It's that there's so many people with baggage and fear around art that the only way to get them to make a step forward is to remind them, hey, look, we're just capturing ideas here. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be something you're hanging in a gallery. If it is, hey, that's a great cherry on top. But our focus here is simply putting together these squares, circles, triangles, lines, dots in a logical way to express yourself. That's it. And what I see when I teach that is the stress level and the freak out level of people drops a lot, because now the criteria by which we say what drawing is now simplified. And it's now like putting Lego pieces together, not sitting in a life drawing class drawing a person and you're rushed or something and you don't have the skills, right? That's a lot of stress and pressure. By making it simpler, it makes it a lot more approachable. And then by making it simple, it's much easier to achieve a small win by, hey, look what I put together and drew by using this simple approach. Now you're approaching drawing from a winning standpoint, like an achievement. I've achieved this small thing. I can do the next thing, and then I can do the next thing, and then next thing you know, they're building up these skills little by little, so that they feel like now I'm able to draw and have an expansive ability, which keeps on, if you practice it, keeps on growing.
Yeah. And would you say to people to help to get over the stigma of that fear, even if they just 5 minutes every day, if they just pick up their sketchbook and just, doesn't matter what it is, just do a quick doodle, start to get a little bit of a habit of like, I'll just draw the cup of tea in front of me, and it doesn't matter
Yeah.
how good it is. It's
Right.
it's again, it's going back to the hand-eye, the haptic, getting the pencil in your hand and actually having a go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, something that in the book, the original book, one of the activities was, okay, get your sketchbook or your paper and draw everything you can in your kitchen using this method of putting pieces of elements together. And so that was there's a grid with names of you can put your names of the toaster or whatever, and you're to draw those very mundane things. So I think drawing the mundane things, I think there's two things that I'll say for someone who's maybe feels like they can't draw and they're not really sure where to start. Number one, you have to have grace for yourself. If you're someone who hasn't drawn since you were 12 and you're 27, you're not going to be drawing like someone who's practiced their whole life drawing. That's just not reality. So you have to have grace and say, hey, look, I'm learning something and it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. The second thing I would say is there's a lot of pressure on this platform, on Instagram, to share work. And if you feel like it's not ready, that you're going to get criticized. So I think number two is don't share it until you feel like it's ready for you, like you have to be comfortable with it. So it's okay to do it for yourself and never show anybody, and continually keep things for yourself, right? Not everything has to be shared that you create. You can choose the things to share until you're ready for that.
I think that's right, and it's interesting because one thing I've noticed you're right. I mean, the pressure on the platform, pressure on any social media platform, but particularly Instagram as a visual platform, is it seems to be that there's a lot of very photorealistic work out there, and obviously that takes a lot of skill and it's a certain type of eye and all the rest of it. But it doesn't. For me, I would just rather see somebody who's in the middle of their process, and you can see actually what they're thinking is, rather than that very photorealistic.
Right.
But I know it's a very popular approach, and I'm not knocking it, but it doesn't have to. And again, this is a big thing at the Big Draw. It's almost shifting away from the end product. And actually, I'd like to pick up at some of the things you said about education and learning, because I see that very much mirrored over in the UK about what happens with children in formal learning environments or when they stop drawing. There's quite a lot of research around it, actually. But it's there's just so much on, let's share the end result, let's share the outcome, and all the process, whereas surely the process is the interesting bit. So I often find bemused, it's just my own personal, why can't we share, what's wrong with the process? It's not all about the end product. But going back, sorry, go.
Can I ask a question? I want to ask a question of Annelise that came to my mind. You've made a statement that you're a perfectionist, right? But there must be, obviously, I've seen some of your finished pieces are beautiful, but there must be studies and sketches and lots of work in between. So how do you do your process? And like we see the end product, at least, the bits that I've seen. What about your process? Obviously, you can't be perfect in that. And how do you square that with your perfectionism? How do you deal with that? Because I think there's a lot of people like you who feel like I'm a perfectionist and it has to be perfect or I don't do it at all. My son will do that. He'll do a little doodle, and if he doesn't like it, he puts a big X through it because it wasn't good enough. It's like, but that part was really beautiful, Landon, right? So what would you say to someone who's like you?
Yeah, so I've started trying to share a bit more of the process for that reason. Because you're right, yeah, it's messy. It's very messy and it's chaotic and it's a little manic sometimes, and that just goes into creation. Like that's how you build a visual vocabulary, right? Like I can maybe render a skull well or anatomically correctly, but I can't draw a fish or something for a sketch note. It's just about practicing the small bits that build up on itself. So I started drawing just sketches every day with no pressure on myself to be perfect, just to try them every day and see what would happen. And I think letting go of that perfectionism by trying to do something every day without any pressure really helped me overcome it. Because nobody was looking. And even if I shared them, it was like, well, it doesn't matter. It was 30 minutes every morning, it's not a masterpiece. But yeah, that all builds into your larger abilities and your skills. Yeah. And you never know, in the messy bits, you usually find the most interesting things, like you were saying, exactly. Kate. So
yeah, I would love to see some of those on these. For me, I find the process pieces just much more beautiful than some very polished end end product. But I wanted to pick on something that, I mean, maybe the question is to both of you. It's something that when we're having these conversations with people and different guests, there's often, and it may not be applicable here, but there's often a feeling of, and some of these people, they're so incredibly successful, like they're really whizzy, and they're coming in and they go, oh, but I didn't go to school. Oh, but I didn't do this. And you're like, and look at what you're doing. And there's this sort of sense of that in some way they are a bit fake, or there's it's that phrase I forgot the other day when we were talking. What's it called?
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. And they'll go, well, actually, I think I've got imposter syndrome. And actually, I don't. I think it's a fluke, or it's this, or it's that. And it's incredibly common because there's different ways about going into things, and everybody has different paths, don't they? Some people will come through more traditional, go to do this, go to art school, and certainly over in the UK there's some very well trod ways that you can go, and there's all the courses, and it's the right places to go, and all this. It's there's a trope around it, this is how you do it. But then I feel sometimes that you have to almost unlearn all of that and really to put your own mark on things. There's something about coming at it with a fresh perspective. I don't know. I wondered what you both thought about that. And I mean, self-taught artists, people who are coming at it from different angles. And it'd be good to hear both of your own, maybe your personal creative journeys into how you got to where you are now. So who wants to go first?
I'd love to hear Annelise first.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think I was one of those kids that I was more into academics than anything else. Not because I naturally was into academics more than sports or art or anything, but my family really valued that a lot. And in the school that I went to, if you were in more of the academic programs, you actually didn't get any art or physical education classes at all. So through middle school and high school, I just didn't have any. And then I moved to Switzerland in high school, and they had art classes. And the kids were so much better than I was because I hadn't practiced drawing since I was really young. And they were just so far beyond my abilities that I thought I couldn't paint and I couldn't draw. And I was just a terrible, I couldn't be considered an artist or good at visual thinking. And it wasn't until college, my roommate was a painter, and she was away one day, and I just got her oil paints out and started playing with them and fell in love with how you can move light, and something clicked for me. And then since then, I've started my own practice of drawing every day. But my parents very practically told me to go to design school because I needed a practical career in life. So I was educated for graphic design. So it wasn't until after college that I actually started drawing and painting. And yeah, I'm self-taught, I guess, but I don't know, it's hard to say because you're always taught by someone or something, right? Just looking at other people, just being influenced is a way of learning. And I think you get the same type of thing in school. Maybe you get I'm sure you get different educations depending on where you go, but I think in a way we're all self-taught and we're all imposters and we're all just doing we're all on our own, journey of creating. So
I think the thing about some of it sounds like I'm being horrible about art schools, but I'm really not. They're fantastic. But I think because of the nature of them, and because of, there's specific tutors there, and there's particular ideologies that the school follows, even if it's not overt, it's still there. So there's a sort of impact that this is how we do things. That you do see that the cohorts that come out, you can almost, I won't mention that, you can almost go, oh yeah, they're so and so, they've come, because you can see this almost this rubber stamping on, and then you hear and you say, well, that's great, but it's quite limiting, and you almost have to break that thinking, keep the best bits of it and start again and do your own thing. So yes, everyone is self-taught to a degree, but I think that some models can be quite confining. I mean, I would argue that there's a huge movement, certainly over in the UK for this, that it's time for a new model of art, but that's a whole different conversation.
There is one more thing I'll say about that too, though, is I think because I didn't have a formal education, sometimes I feel like my skills are lacking. So I am self-taught anatomical drawings, and I'm really fascinated by anatomical drawings and the more academic side. So I've decided to learn it and go more in depth with that, just so that I can have the skills to express myself in a way where I don't have to think anymore. So if I can render something accurately and I don't have to think about proportions or how a wrist would turn in a certain way, then I'm more free to express the ideas that I have without being held up by reality, I guess. So, but it depends, because I think it depends what you're doing. You know, there's a difference between when I'm oil painting and when I'm doing illustration work, because the illustration is all from imagination and I don't usually use references. And so I think it really depends the type of work you're doing. And there's a place for the more academic, traditional approaches, and there's a place for radically going off the wall and doing something more imaginative and unique.
Are you finding, I mean, in terms of, it sounds like you're juggling a lot. I mean, are you finding time to juggle in your arts practice, the development of that alongside your more graphic design work?
Yeah, I'm pretty disciplined. So every morning I'll wake up and draw for 2 hours, and then on the weekends I paint. So I make sure that I give myself the time.
Yeah.
But burnout is real.
You're carving out the time to make sure that you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I get burnt out too.
And Mike, can I bring you in? What about you in terms of your?
Yeah. Well, as a small boy, we didn't. You know, when I grew up, we were lower middle class, I guess you'd say. So we didn't have lots of toys. We had a few toys. So typically, if I wanted something, I had to make it. So often I would want a comic, but we couldn't afford one, or I was too little. I would just make my own comics and newspapers, and so it was pretty normal for me to have paper and pencils and other tools around. They were pretty inexpensive, so I would just draw things as a kid. I was really well known for my ability to spot cars, and when I was young, I told my parents apparently that cars all had faces, so I could tell them by their faces. So the certain car would look this way and that way. So basically, I was doing pattern recognition, right, of these vehicles, so I could spot them. Oh, that's a Chevy, or that's a whatever. So that was part of my growing up as a kid. And as I got into school, I tended to find myself in places where drawing was needed. So as an example, when I got into high school, I ended up on the school newspaper, and one of my favorite memories was because I was doodling and drawing all the time. They would say, "Hey, Mike, we've laid the paper out, but we have this 1-inch by 2-inch chunk of space, and we don't know what to do with it. We can't, you know, our whole article's in there. What can you come up with?" So I would read the article, and I would do a little illustration, and just to that size, custom fit it, and they would stick it in there. And so later, when I went to college, I did the same thing. I ended up on the school newspaper. I did cartooning. I had a cartoon strip. I did drawings. I was moving into graphic design at that time, so a lot of what I would do is doing thumbnail sketches of what would the pages look like, the specially designed pages, and then I would work from those to build the production work. So my life has always been a mix of artistic and technical. So even computers were sort of a blend. So I was drawing at the same time that I was interested in computers and how they could express. So I've always been sort of had a foot in both sides. So when people ask me, you know, is the iPad eliminated pencil and paper for you? Not really. I mean, it just expanded my palette, if you think of it that way. And I really look at it because I started as a graphic designer, production designer. I always look at everything from a production perspective. Like if I'm going to do a commission where I'm doing like book illustrations, I would use the iPad because I have the ability to modify those things, because inevitably the client's going to come back and say, "Oh, the eye's too high. Can you move the mouth down? Can you change that thing there?" Right? And if I had hand drawn them, I would have to hand draw them, and I've done that, so I know that experience. So having this ability to do edits and undos is really valuable. And so that was where I ended up in graphic design. And you know, probably the story relevant to this discussion is right around 2006. I'd gotten so deeply into technology that I'd kind of forgotten a little bit of my drawing. I used it in my design work, but when I would take notes, I was either typing them, and then I felt like I needed to get back into analog note taking. So I would take these big notebooks and a pencil, and I would write everything down. And it got so stressful because I felt like I was always missing something. There was something I was missing because I wasn't recording it. I was just writing as fast as I could. And then the other problem was I was really good at writing a lot. But the downside is then you have a book full of notes that's maybe 15 pages top to bottom with just text. Like, I don't want to go through that and figure out what's valuable. It was really painful. And I thought there has to be a better way. As a designer, why don't I just set a project for myself where let's just invert everything. Let's do a George Costanza. I don't know if you remember Seinfeld. George Costanza had this one episode where he does everything opposite, and then he gets a beautiful girlfriend and a great job and a nice car or whatever. Like, he does everything opposite he normally does. So I sort of did that, and I said, well, I've got this big notebook. What if I use a little pocket one? I'm using a pencil. What if I use a pen? And the idea was, with a small book, it would limit the amount that I could write, because that was one of my problems. I wrote too much. I would just write everything. So that slowed me down there. And then using the pen meant, okay, I have to really think about what ink is going on the page, because once it's on the page, I can't take it away. And either I have to work with it or, do something. I have to work around it. So I had to be a lot more deliberate. And I think the combination of those two things slowed me down a little bit in the first event that I went to. And I started to absorb information. I was looking at the slides. I was more relaxed. I didn't feel pressured to write everything down. I love typography and lettering. So I started doing lettering on the page to emphasize ideas. I was drawing little images as well as still writing, and ended up in the first experiment with Sketchnotes, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 pages with some text and some lettering and some drawings. And I got to the end of it and I thought, wow, that was like night and day. I could do that again. Let's keep experimenting. And then that led to trying it in all different formats and eventually being hired to do it for a period of time. And then ultimately starting Sketchnote Army to showcase other people who I was starting to see doing this work, and then writing the books, because I just felt like if this is a problem for me, it's probably a problem for more than a variety of people. So why not capture these principles that I learned through experimentation and share those with the world? And so that ended up taking the form of a couple of books that have done well, and then teaching, where I can take those same concepts and teach them in a way where I'm walking students through step by step, and they can get reaction and feedback during those live sessions. So it's all been a lot of fun, and that's kind of where I'm at right now. I still do design and software design, and I also use sketchnoting to express those ideas too. So it sort of comes out all over the place. I just can't seem to stop it from appearing in my life. So I guess that means it should probably stay.
It's embedded.
Yeah.
It's totally embedded. I mean, I'm keeping an eye on the time. Now, I think we build this as an hour, and it's ready. We've got about a quarter of an hour left, but I think the three of us said if we were still happy, we could maybe do another 15 minutes or so, or another 10, 15 minutes. So I wanted to just check in with you both to make sure that would still be okay. Because I've got a few big topics here. I've got, I'll tell you what they are. I've got well-being, getting into the flow, education, analog, digital, hybrid, what do we think? Top tips, pandemic. So there's quite a few big meaty ones there. So I just wanted to make sure so if we're all right, the three of us, to carry on a little bit beyond the hour.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Fantastic. So
it looked like we had a question of where they can see examples of sketchnotes. And I just want to say, if you go to the Sketchnote Army, which is the platform that Mike runs, you'll see tons of examples of great sketchnotes.
Yeah, currently there's it's podcast season, new season has started, so there's a lot of podcasts currently, but if you go back into the archives, there's plenty of work there. You can look also on my Instagram feed. If you scroll back, it's a mix of things, but there's some Sketchnote work in there you can find if you'd like to see what that looks like.
Well, maybe this is a good opportunity so that none of us forget to say some of the things that we're supposed to say. But so obviously, just in terms of books, so is it 2 books you have, Mike? Oh.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, I think people, if they want to find out more about the books, they can go onto your website. So,
right.
And that's easy enough. Can you just tell everyone what the website address is?
Sure can. It's rohdesign.com, rohdesign.com. And if you go to peachpit.com, which is linked from there, I can offer a discount code for people that saves 40%, gets the price to around Amazon price. So it's Rohde40, ROHDE, and the number 40, and that should give you a discount on the books at peachpit.com.
And just to say as well that we have, the Big Draw has recently done a blog with Mike that is out there. So it's on different social media platforms. It's also sitting on the Big Draw's website under blogs, and has been shared very kindly by both Concepts and Mike. And also we have a workshop coming up with you, don't we, Mike?
We do.
So we've got Wednesday, this must be the diary, I think. So this is a collaboration, again, obviously with the Fab team over at Concepts and with Mike, and that'll be on Wednesday the 2nd of March. And we'll be putting out, well, I think actually the Eventbrite link is live now, actually. But there'll be more information coming up very soon, but it's pretty much ready to go. So if people who are on the call are interested in that as well, just go on to any of the 3 different oh, thank you, Eleanor. Eleanor's put the blog into the chat. Thank you, Eleanor. And I know Eleanor's made the Eventbrite link live as well. So just so we don't forget those. And obviously, if people want to go onto the Concepts website as well, Annelise.
It's concepts.app. And you can find all the downloads right there at the top. And also, our CEO, David Britton, did an interview with Mike in 2020. So if you're interested in hearing more about the beginning of Concepts and how you can use Concepts with sketchnoting, you can also check out that podcast. That's the Sketchnote Army podcast. So
that's correct.
And they started up again recently, haven't they? Mike, the podcast, you're back into your new season. Isn't it just the other day?
Tuesday we started season 11, and we have an interview with another well-known person on Instagram. His name's Paul Mignard. He does sketchy sermons. So he takes religious concepts that he's thinking about, and he visualizes those every morning as a single panel sketch note, and has discussions. And his style is really unique. When you see it, it's it's Paul, right, when you see that work. So if you look up sketchy sermons on Instagram, you can see that work.
And obviously, if people want to find out the Big Draw, just put the Big Draw in, and we will come up sort of pretty much all over the place. So I think between the 3 of us, we've done the bits that we're supposed to do. So nobody else off. Go back to our.
We've done all the plugs.
Yeah, you forgot to say about the workshop. You forgot to say. So I think we've done the plug. So just going back to the conversation, I wanted to pick up a bit on obviously the pandemic, but also talk a little bit about health, really, health and well-being. And obviously this is something that we're all very mindful, I think, not least in the fallout of the pandemic. But I think particularly thinking around mark making, drawing, sketching, whatever we call it. And we talked a little bit about this, the 3 of us, the other day. I mean, from a personal experience for me, I mean, I draw. It's for my own. For me, really, it's not really for anybody else. I like to knit. For me, the hand-to-eye motion, the haptic is quite similar for sewing and knitting. But I think particularly with drawing, and a certain type of drawing, which is that type where you choose some random thing. So, it could be the lip salve or whatever. And you just hone in on that. And you just cut everything else out. Get rid of the children because they're really noisy, all the usual. And you just hone in on that. And it's that really, and again, you're choosing what you're seeing, what you're actually drawing, using the drawing to actually see, but you get lost. And some people call it getting lost into the flow. People have different phrases for it, don't they? But I mean, I think I would say you get in the flow, really. But it's that sense of, you think maybe 5 minutes has gone and an hour and a half has gone, and it's because you're just immersed in what you're doing. And you come out to the end of it, and it's incredibly recentering. I would say quite therapeutic. I think it's increasingly being shown to be it is good for your health and well-being. And there's lots of increasingly robust academic surveys and studies being done out there, people trying to prove it. But it's very interesting. I wondered what both of your experiences were of that, because of what's been going on in the last couple of years.
I mean, like I said, I have a daily drawing practice for my own mental sanity, because I definitely notice when I am not drawing and giving myself time to do that every day, that, I mean, it's definitely a type of meditation, I think, for me.
Yes.
It
Is
helps
that,
calm the
yeah,
manic mind.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but you sound very disciplined as well with it, Annalise.
I think it comes out of necessity. Yeah. The more manic the mind, the more disciplined you have to be with setting structures
That's so
for
that's this
yourself.
calm veneer that we see.
Yeah, exactly.
Is a turmoil going on behind
I
this?
don't, well, now it's not. I think when I was younger it was probably, but I think creating structure for myself helped.
Oh, we've just had Penny say you frozen. Well, hopefully we're all back now. I think maybe I froze or somebody froze for a minute, but hopefully everybody on the call can still hear us. And Mike, what about yourself? I mean, it's very clear that for Annalise, yeah, obviously it's an art, it's developing a practice, and I think that discipline, doing something every day, is incredibly powerful. But also that it helps your mental health. Do you feel that there's an element of that for you? Have you
Oh
used it
yeah.
over the last?
Yeah, definitely. If it's something where I'm drawing ideas from my mind, I find that using music as an additional gateway to help me get into a flow state helps. I typically like um, non-vocal music, so it would just be instrumental music,
Yeah.
particularly either ambient or maybe if I want to be energetic, I might choose some post-rock type music, which guitars and drums and such. One of my go-tos myself is a band called L1011 out of Los Angeles. It's two guys that play, one on the drums and the other on a guitar or bass, and they produce amazing layered sound. And I guess the other thing I would say is repeating the same music. So there's something about known music, like it additionally lays back in the background. If it's new music, I tend to be interested in like, oh, what was that? What were they playing, or the melody or something? And when you go to known music that you know well, like it tends to put me in a flow state a lot faster. So that's one
Yeah.
component. And that can often help when I'm doing any kind of exploration. If I'm doing, let's say I'm taking a recorded meeting and converting into a Sketchnote, it's a little bit tougher. I mean, I can have music running in the background, but there I just sort of center on the information and try to have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or something. Like I try to make as many of the environment around me conducive to staying in the flow state as I can. Close the door, noise canceling headphones, something I enjoy. So there's all these positive reinforcements to staying in that state. That seems to help because I feel like it is very meditative as well.
It's breathing, isn't it? It's trying to slow your breathing down and sort of the whole thing. I find you're right with music, and I think you're right, particularly if you know it. And there's sections that repeat, because I think that lends itself to some of the lines, the shape and the line of the drawing. So you might get a piece within the music, a passage that is repeating, and that lends itself to a repeating type of line or pencil pressure or whatever it might be. And similar with dance as well. We've seen quite a lot of the big draw, because people are running events across all different disciplines where they're using drawing and mark making as well, and that sort of repetitive to get into a state. And then, I mean, one we always have that's a very regular one, and I think they probably think they're being very unique, but we see them every year, is performance art students who take all their clothes off, cover themselves in paint, roll around on the floor and make marks on the floor. We're like, yeah, we've seen that one about 1 million times before, but that's all right.
Yeah, I'd say Yves Klein did that.
Say that
in
again?
the 50s. This is just say Yves Klein did that in the 50s.
Yeah, I know.
Klein Blue
Something
guy.
that we see a lot of. You get to see the same thing, the same events. Drawing robots is a very popular one. No clothes, rolling around on the floor with paint. Children going like this, making circles. Trees. There's definitely something in the human consciousness across all cultures about trees, because all cultures draw trees. It's just one of those things like, oh, another tree. So it's quite interesting when you see the same things, the same imagery and things cropping up. But going back to the pandemic, and I suppose it's moving away from wellbeing now, I'm thinking more around, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, Mike, it is that whole relationship between analog and digital, and it's something that we have to navigate a lot at the Big Draw. I mean, the Big Draw's in its 22nd year this year. We've been going for 22 years, and obviously digital has exploded over the last sort of 15 years, really. So occasionally, less so now, I would say, occasionally I will come up against somebody and they'll say, well, why is the big draw narrating, championing a type of drawing with a digital pencil? That's not drawing. And obviously I will counter that and say, well, of course, why is that any different? If that's accessible for that child or for that individual, it's just as valid as more analog traditional drawing. And I would always say it's not one or the other, it's both. And increasingly we're seeing people, well, lots of people in their practices, and you've both talked about it, will seamlessly work from one to the other and merge the two. And even fine artists actually do some really interesting work about blending the different approaches. But I wondered what you both might have to say about that, whether you come up against that in your jobs as almost a snobism.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to understand that everything is a tool, right? And you're not going to cut your grass with scissors. So these tools aren't like, you can't do one thing with every tool. You know, pencil and paper is great, and an oil and canvas is great, and Procreate is great, and Concepts app is great, but they're all different. They all serve different functions. And I think it's good to remember. Personally, in my design school, we had one day where we had to do digital illustration. And at the time, it was like nobody had tablets. We were all using like really basic ways of digital illustration. And almost everyone in my class was like, this is so much harder than I thought. I thought I would just be able to draw. And I was like, well, can you draw on paper? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, why would you think that you could do it digitally? It's the same thing, really. So yeah, I've experienced it. But it is, I mean, it's all different tools, and it does take skill to draw a master work in any medium.
Yeah. And the tools have become so much more advanced. I remember even near the beginning of when I started at the Big Draws, that probably about 9 years ago, I remember with some of the earlier tablets, artists and some of the very early pencils that were around, artists saying, oh, well, I'm not getting that same traction, that slight resistance I get when and so they get some greaseproof paper or something weird, see through and put it over the top so that you can still see through, but just to get a bit more of a sense of the same feel. But of course things have come along massively, and they all different things now, can't you, with the different tips and all the rest of it, so it's all moved along massively. But
now they make paper screen protectors, and it really changes the experience. It does feel like paper now, so it's nice.
Yeah, it's trying to replicate that same. But we do still come across that at the Big Draw, and I don't know whether the word is, snobism isn't the word, but you know what I mean. There's almost a purist approach to saying, well, if it's done digitally, it doesn't have the same value. I think it's a really interesting one, particularly when you start to think about NFTs and the way that things are heading there, and the hand of the artist or the maker and all of those comments. That's a whole different conversation, but it starts to get quite esoteric, but it is very interesting. But I think looking at, you're right, Annelise, really you can get very esoteric with it all, but it's about which tool is right for the job, and sometimes it's a combination of different tools. Sometimes there's one very specific thing that's a no-brainer, and that's what you use, isn't it? And it's having that flexibility and choice to be able to use them to come up with the best result. It's as simple as that, I think. Do you think that the pandemic has, I mean, maybe this is really more for you, Annelise. I mean, do you think that the pandemic has meant more people are downloading apps like Concepts and not all of them, but do you think there's...
I mean, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone was locked down, people were just looking for new ways that they could be creative and explore different hobbies that maybe they hadn't before. So I think, a lot of people started skating too, which is a funny side effect of the pandemic too. Like everyone has roller skates all of a sudden. But yeah, I mean, I think people had more time. Not having to go to the office or whatever it was, that, not being able to go to the bars at night, they could sit home and just say like, well, maybe I should draw. So yeah, I think it has maybe positively affected people in some ways.
I think also what we've been hearing at the Big Draw is in terms of accessibility, and people who have a whole range of different abilities and different needs and disabilities. There's a voice coming from that sector. People are saying, well, do you know what? This is nothing new for us. We have depending on the particular need, the level of need, or the particular disability. They're saying, you know, we've been working in our studios forever anyway, as artists and practitioners, makers, and we've been collaborating through Skype forever, and you know, before Zoom was everywhere, we've been doing all of this already. This is nothing new, this sort of digital collaboration, this way of doing things, because we are not able to get out the front door, for example, because we physically can't walk. So there's an evolving narrative around that, of saying that actually what has happened in the pandemic, it has opened up for many people, because it's more of a leveling up. Well, I hate using that word because they're using that over in the UK at the moment from Boris Johnson. But anyway, it's a leveling up to help with some other people.
Equalizer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's much better. And I hope that doesn't go back, because there's a vibe, there's a feeling that, okay, as things go back, but there is no going back to normal. Things are not going to ever go back to exactly, everything has shifted and changed. So we have to sort of embrace a lot of these new ways of working, these hybrid models, these blended learning models that everyone's talking about, not only in the office, but also in formal learning environments, kids, young people, universities. It's going to have to stay, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I think it's part of the whatever this culture is becoming. Hybrid, some kind of hybrid to whatever degree it is. I would say the other thing maybe that assists in access to these digital tools are the machines themselves. If you look at every iPad that Apple offers, they all work with a pencil now, and you can get the basic iPad for like $329 US. So, I mean, it's not like getting a ream of paper and a bunch of pens at the office supply store, right? That's maybe $10, right? So it's expensive, but still expensive for
a lot of people. But to what it be,
more than how it began, and the power. I mean, not only the hardware, but then of course now you got tools like Concepts that unlock that power and make it possible to do things you couldn't do before, right? So, all things considered, if you compare to where we were 10 years ago, even when the iPad first released, to now, like the amount of machine and the power and the ability and software to be able to execute what your idea is in many different ways is much greater. It's exponentially greater than even 10 years ago, which I think, you know, it's going to be really interesting to see what comes of it in the long term. I mean, we're starting to see it now, but there's going to be more change probably coming from that as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think accessibility to information as well has just radically changed in the last 10 years. Like if you think about what YouTube was 10 years ago compared to now, like you can learn anything. You have access to all of these amazing tools and resources for free.
Mm-hmm.
You do, but I suppose the flip side of that for me was somebody who has two quite young children, well, sort of nearly 12 and nearly 11, and I had a conversation with them 2 days ago, and as somebody who is, you know, you were talking, Mike, about when you were little, making your own comics and magazines and things, and that's what we did. And I'm 50 later this year, and I remember I constantly say to my children, oh, I used to just, you know, why can't you read? Why can't you just go and draw something? Go and draw a game. Go and make a game up. And they're like, oh, yeah, back to the twigs and sticks and the paper, is it? You know, the story. And they're very, you know, disparaging about it all. And I was like, well, maybe, yes, but at least you use your imagination, because I feel that quite strongly that there is this, the internet is so incredible as a resource, and all the things you're talking about. But my children go look at that. They go on to YouTube. They want to try and go on TikTok. I don't let them. You know, there's about 3 or 4 things they go on to, and you just think, oh my goodness, there is this ocean of knowledge out there, and they are choosing to do it in such an incredibly limited way. So I don't know. There's those challenges, isn't there, around digital as well? And I think children and how you navigate that safely and all of those things as well. So yeah, very interesting in terms of what the future holds with that. But one thing I just wanted to pick up on in terms of education, we've got about 8 minutes left between the three of us. We've already gone over it, haven't we? You both touched on this. Now, it's that story that we hear at the Big Draw, I honestly would say probably every week from somebody. And the story goes, I was at school and I loved being creative. I loved drawing. I might not have been brilliant, but I liked sort of sketching or doing something. Or I may have been like Leonardo, blah, blah. But I got to secondary school and it wasn't encouraged. I was a bright academic child, so I was told, oh, that's not for you. You need to go do maths, chemistry and physics, STEM subjects for you. You don't need to bother with those because only the thickies do the art subjects. And you get put down a certain route. And you do go through the whole cycle, through the mill, come out the other end and think, well, I really didn't want to do that. And then they go back to art school. Or they rediscover it 30 years over, feeling quite frustrated that they've just gone through a massive cycle. And if only they could have done what they wanted originally. Now, I'm being quite provocative and extreme, but I would say that, of course, that's an extreme version. But we hear the story all the time, and it still does happen to a degree. It does. People are still channeled, people are still labelled and put into containers and said, oh, you're this, you're that, if you're academic. I mean, you touched on this earlier as well, Annelise. And I think it's an incredibly worrying way of doing things. And I wondered what your thoughts were on that.
I can probably counter it a little bit in some encouraging things that I've seen.
Oh, good.
Because of the work that I'm doing with sketchnoting, it's actually very, very attractive for teachers. And the thing that I see that's happening, so this is pre-pandemic, but also post, but pre-pandemic, I would travel to school districts and teach teachers. In many cases, it was maybe the beginning of the second semester. I would come in and there'd be 800 teachers in a room, and I would walk them through the basics of sketchnoting and have them follow along, or I would teach a smaller group. And the thing that would happen is typically it would be one teacher would find my book or learn about it on the internet or something, and they would start getting excited because they could see exactly the things I was saying. Is it engages you, your retention is better, and then your ability to understand is better, right? So from a teacher's perspective, that's like the golden triangle for students to be able to conceptualize information. And if there's a desire by students to do doodling and do visualization, drawing, to allow them to do that rather than scold them, and then redirect it towards something that will actually benefit them and have fun with it, they see that as a positive. So it's usually one teacher will get excited about it, and then they'll kind of push it up to the leadership, usually the principal, and then the principal will call me and say, hey, can you fly over here and teach our staff how to do this so then they can teach our students? That's happened repeatedly in person. And then as this pandemic happened, there were still teachers in different districts that wanted it. So we just set it up on Zoom. So I would teach those school districts. And so those teachers are very excited and see the benefits and are promoting it. So there is a strain of teachers that are incorporating sketchnoting into their curriculum. There's now teachers that are teaching in different events how to do this work because they're excited about it and they see the benefits. So I think there is definitely a movement there. It's hard to quantify how big it is. And of course, there's always going to be, the hard grading, tough teacher that stop doodling in my class person, right? That will need to be convinced by someone who can show them, hey, look, here's the benefits of it. And then, it might take a while for that, or maybe it's a generation of teachers that now come into it and see that visualization is really valuable, and then that becomes smaller. So I would say be a little bit encouraged that there are teachers that do that.
It's the senior, you've got to get, we do this a lot with if you don't get the senior leadership buy-in, it's so difficult. It's to try and get anything creative into the classroom. And it's all about if you can get them on board and you've got a passionate advocate within the team that they can push it through, whether that's just access to some creative workshops or whether it's something like this. And I know, Annelise, with Concepts, I think we're going to be talking to Damien Parker at the Big Draw quite soon. You've also, Concepts have been embedded, exactly, getting the right school, the right teachers, embedding, using Concepts and using some of the tools that you've just talked about across the curriculum. And actually, I'm really looking forward to seeing some more case studies around that. And I'd love to hear more about that, Mike, actually, if you have got any more data on that we could share over here. And then there's people like Paul Carney. There's loads of people written books about some of these things who are teachers this side of the pond as well. But it's just trying to get it over. There's this swell of feeling and movement. We're all talking about it, but it's very hard to actually really get that switch in a lot of the schools, and certainly over here. But yeah, good to hear some positive news about that. So we've only got a few minutes left. So I was thinking maybe to round off from both of you. I was thinking really about if there's anything else that you wanted to share, anything personal that you wanted to share, anything. I don't mean like personal, but like your tips. You know, if you're like Annelise, what you were saying about your daily practice about drawing, I would love to see some of your work. You know, if somebody was saying to you, oh well, I want to do this, but ... What are both of your top tips for people who are, and I know they'll be coming from all different disciplines and sectors. Annelise, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. I think just setting aside 20 or 30 minutes every day whenever you have the time for that, and just really carving out the time in your day, 20 or 30 minutes, and just draw every day. Start simply by just drawing, like you're saying, draw everything in your kitchen, draw one thing every day, and just build your visual library. That's been really helpful for me. And it evolves into very interesting places that you don't see coming from the beginning. So
yeah. And what about you, Mike?
I'm going to go with two top tips. One, and I've already said this once, but I think it bears repeating, and that is have grace for yourself. So I love Annalise's idea of like setting us, like put it on your calendar. The buzzer goes off on your phone. It says time to draw or whatever, right? And then you go to your place and you have your coffee and your music, and then you draw for that time. So I would say have grace so that when things don't go right and they're not turning out like you like, that you realize that it's the process of doing it that has value, even if the output isn't there yet, and that it takes time to do that. And then the second thing I would say is something I've learned and I've sort of tried to experiment with is when things do go wrong, look at what's interesting about that mistake, either as what could I turn that into, or what did I learn from that maybe you wouldn't do it that way next time, but what's something interesting about it? Like, I think we're so conditioned to, if something fails, oh, let's just forget about it, never do it again. You know, it never happened. Like, what can we learn from those mistakes? I know my experience with my father was he would teach me once and then I would have to do it. And then often I would make mistakes the first time. And as I knew the question was coming, I hated that question. So Mike, what did you learn? Right. And then I would explain, like, what did I learn from this mistake? Well, next time I won't use that wrench or whatever the thing was. It could have been anything. Yeah. And I think that's really valuable to deconstruct, like, well, what did I learn from it? And what's interesting about it? Because there could be something really valuable. I think Annelise mentioned this, that in the sketches, there's stuff in there as you're like exploring this unlimited canvas. You're like putting things that are coming out of your head. You might come back to that and say, I drew that? That's really interesting. Like, there might be all this interesting stuff that's coming out of you. And in the moment, you can't recognize it. You have to come back and see it later. So that would be my second tip.
Yeah. An exercise that sometimes works really well with quite young children, it's really primary school, is if I was going in and talking to them, one of the things I would say, first of all, to them is like, look around the classroom, or if it's like a forest school or something, so it's more outdoorsy. Look around you, and I want you to all tell me what would be left if drawing, visual literacy, mark making didn't exist. And you can see them all going, oh wow, and like wow, and like, oh my god, we'd be naked and there'd be nothing left around, it would just be a tree. I'm like, yeah, because everything around you at some point, whether it's your phone or your drink or your necklace, whatever, it's at some point it's got that hand of somebody has conceived it, has conceptualized it. And then the thing that often we'll do then is literally, and I love the messiness of it, but I love also the randomness of it. It's exactly what you were just saying. You're just getting some big bits of paper, and whether it's just like smudgy charcoal and just getting to smear random marks, or even just splash some paint everywhere and saying, okay, now look for the shapes and look for the faces, make some little characters, and you can just see them like, oh my god, so it doesn't matter that there's mistakes. Like, no, this is just playful creating, and you can see, and there's a giraffe and there's a face there, and okay, there's a mean person in the background, that's a bit creepy, and it's mind-blowing, really. It's just it's actually it's all about the experimentation and the mistakes and the playfulness, isn't it, really? That's where all the best inventions have come from. If you look to history across different disciplines, inventions, innovations comes out of the mistakes.
Yeah, the sticky note was failed adhesive, right? The adhesive that they made wrong. Now invented the sticky note.
Yeah. I mean, all I would say before we round off, I would say that thank you to everyone who's joined us on the call. We've had lots and lots of people on the call. I think this has been an incredibly popular one. Please do, anybody on the call, if you have any drawings that you want to share with Annelise, me and Mike, slap them on Twitter or Instagram and tag us in. I mean, certainly the team at The Big Draw would love to share them. So, let's keep, pass it on. Let's keep the drawing going. And do what Annelise says, do some drawing every single day. Share what you're doing with us. Let's all keep talking about drawing and supporting each other. But on a final note, thank you to both of you for being such utterly wonderful, charming, interesting guests. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I hope we can do another one of these as well. Lots more
That'd
to
be
talk
great.
about.
Thanks, Kate. And thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Kate and Annelise. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed myself. But we're way over, aren't we? We get told off by the team. Okay, then. I'm going to go. Thank you to both of you for being so wonderful, and I'll talk to you both soon. And thank you to everyone who joined us. We'll be sharing it. It'll stay on Instagram. We'll share it on YouTube and Twitter. Don't forget Mike's books, Concepts Apps, Big Draw, workshop, Wednesday the 2nd of February. And don't forget to look at Mike's blog. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.